Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom.
In our top story, the IDF has withdrawn its ground forces from the southern Gaza Strip. 6 months after the Hamas invasion of Israel and 4 months after the start of the fighting in the Hamas-run territory, IDF troops have left the southern part of Gaza. Only the Nachal Brigade will remain in the Netzarim corridor that separates the Be'eri area from the coastal enclave. Just hours after pulling out of the Hamas stronghold of Khan Yunis, terrorists fired multiple rockets into Israeli territory. Israel announced that 18 of Hamas's original 24 terror battalions in Gaza have been dismantled so far. 2 Hamas battalions remain in central Gaza, and 4 still function in the stronghold of Rafah. IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi noted that the withdrawal does not indicate an end to the war, and he assured the Israeli public that the IDF will not leave any Hamas brigades active in the Gaza Strip.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he has set a date for the military offensive into the last remaining Hamas stronghold of Rafah. Israel has faced enormous pressure from the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden not to launch a full-scale ground invasion in the southernmost city of Gaza, where many of the 133 hostages are being held by the terror group. 4 Hamas battalions, consisting of more than 4,000 fighters, remain entrenched in Rafah. Jerusalem is adamant that the IDF must eradicate the terror infrastructure in Rafah for the security of the citizens of Israel. Netanyahu stressed, "We are constantly working to achieve our goals. First and foremost, the release of all of our hostages and achieving a complete victory over Hamas. This victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terrorist battalions there." He said, "It will happen. There is a date."
The Israeli Air Force has reportedly been conducting exercises in preparation to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. A report in London's Elif News cites a Western security official as saying that if Tehran attacks the Jewish state, Jerusalem is prepared to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure, as well as other strategic locations inside the Islamic Republic. The Jewish state has been on high alert against an Iranian strike after the targeted assassination of several high-ranking members of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, including Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahidi at the Iranian consulate in Damascus earlier this month.
A newly released intelligence report reveals that Qatar facilitated the October 7th massacre in Israel by funding Hamas and implementing an anti-Israel agenda through its policies. The document, penned by former CIA and Israeli intelligence officials, details the Gulf states' malign activities. It exposes Doha as a fundamentally disingenuous actor, falsely presenting itself as an honest broker, a moderating influence in the region, and a friend of the West, when in actuality, Qatar benefits from the bloodshed and geopolitical fallout that results from its policies. The oil-rich Gulf state has provided over $2 billion to Hamas, which it claims is for welfare projects. However, the report notes that Doha is completely cognizant of the fact that that money is going to support terror.
Israel continues to fight a multi-front war as Iran and its proxy armies attempt to target the Jewish state at home and abroad. Israeli embassies around the world have been placed on high alert against a possible attack by Iranian operatives, and Tehran's proxy armies in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Judea, and Samaria continue to perpetrate violence against Jews inside Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon has fired thousands of rockets into northern Israel, and Iranian-backed terrorists have also sent weaponized drones to wreak havoc and destruction in the Jewish state. These attempts have been thwarted for the most part due to the diligence of the Israeli Defense Forces, who have saved countless lives.
38 Democratic members of the U.S. House of Representatives have urged President Joe Biden to halt weapons shipments to Israel. The Biden administration continues to pressure the Netanyahu government to declare a ceasefire with the Hamas terror group in Gaza, which perpetrated the October 7th massacre and still holds 133 hostages in the Gaza Strip. The Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi and the rabid anti-Israel members of the Squad, Rashida Tlaib and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, demanded that the White House halt arms transfers to the Jewish state as it fights for its very existence against the Iranian-backed Hamas terror group.
The United States District Court for the District of Columbia has ruled that Iran and Syria must pay $191 million for the murder of U.S. Israeli citizen Ari Fold in 2018. Fold was targeted by a Hamas terrorist who reportedly sought out an American target. He was stabbed multiple times, but was able to neutralize the terrorist before he could harm anyone else. Senior Judge Royce Lambert announced that Fold's family is entitled to damages from the hostile countries for their role in state-sponsored Hamas terrorism. He wrote Iran and Syria have once again provided material support to Hamas and thereby facilitated the savage murder of a husband, father, son, and brother to the plaintiffs. While it is unlikely that the Fold family will actually collect damages from the radical Islamic states, the verdict is meant to send a strong message to Hamas and its sponsors.
In another blow to Israel, the Biden administration is reportedly considering placing labels on imported products produced by Jews in Judea and Samaria as made in the West Bank. This anti-Semitic discrimination targets only Israelis living in the historical biblical heartland. The move is meant to pressure Israel from approving further construction of Jewish communities throughout Judea and Samaria. If approved, this measure would reverse a decision in 2020 by the administration of Donald Trump to label all products produced in the region as made in Israel. It's important to note that products produced by Arabs in the same geographical area are not subject to the anti-Semitic labeling regulations that have already been adopted by the European Union in an attempt to boycott Jewish products made in Judea and Samaria.
The Israeli Defense Forces has successfully downed a hostile projectile using a ship-mounted Iron Dome. This is the first time the Sea Dome missile defense system has neutralized a threat from the Red Sea. Sea Dome was installed on Israel's fleet of SAR 6-class corvette ships. In December, the INS Magen was dispatched to the Red Sea to combat the threat of cruise missile, drone, and ballistic missile attacks on Israel's southernmost city of Eilat by the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen.
Anti-Iranian activist Vahid Beheshti has praised Israel's attacks on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, saying it will bolster the resistance and give the Iranian people the strength to overthrow the fanatic Islamic regime. In an exclusive interview with Israel National News, Beheshti said Tehran poses a grave threat to Israel and the West, and that Iran's goal is to turn the world into an Islamic caliphate. He believes ongoing negotiations are allowing Tehran to move closer toward nuclear breakout. Beheshti noted that recent attacks on Iranian terror leaders in Damascus were celebrated by the Iranian people, who have been oppressed and abused by the Ayatollah's hardline government. He cautioned Western leaders, saying they have two choices: help the Iranian people or wait and give the evil regime access to nuclear weapons. He called for the United States and Europe to provide military support for the resistance inside Iran so it can overthrow the radical Shiite regime.
The McDonald's franchise has bought back 225 stores in Israel after it was harshly targeted by the anti-Semitic boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Several countries called to boycott the fast food chain after Israeli owners donated food to members of the Israeli security forces. The boycott reportedly caused a meaningful impact on profits worldwide. McDonald's released a statement reinforcing its commitment to the Israeli market and noted that it would take legal action against the activists that targeted its restaurants.
A rare Egyptian jug found near Israel's southern city of Beersheba was unveiled for the first time last week in Jerusalem. The ancient ivory jar was discovered shattered into pieces in 2020 at an excavation at Horvat Rakik by archaeologists with the Israel Antiquities Authority. After a painstaking restoration at the IAA laboratories, the artifact, made from elephant tusks, was publicly unveiled last week at Israel's National Archaeology Campus in Jerusalem.
Sharon Haskel, the co-chair of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, addressed a meeting in the Bundestag on UNRWA's role in the war with Hamas. Members of the German federal parliament were briefed on UNRWA's involvement in bolstering Hamas's capabilities and collusion between UNRWA employees and the Iranian-backed terrorist organization. Haskell presented alternatives to the fundamentally flawed UN body, which is intertwined with terrorist operatives and engaged in collaboration with Palestinian terror groups. Prior to the October 7th massacre of 1,200 people in Israel by Hamas, Germany was one of UNRWA's largest supporters. Israel presented evidence that UNRWA employees not only took part in the genocide, but that 10% of UNRWA employees hold ties to terror organizations. This sparked an international funding freeze to the Palestinian aid organization, but the German government has faced enormous pressure to restore aid to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Haskell told the German lawmakers that continued funding to the organization, marred by collaboration and terrorist entrenchment, hinders any prospect of advancement in the Middle East. She said, "We cannot expect to move forward while endorsing entities that propagate anti-Semitism, hatred, and terrorist activities."
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Stefan Tompson. He's the CEO of Visegrád. Stefan, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell our viewers a little bit, what is Visegrád?
Visegrád is a social media news aggregator and news hub. It creates original content. It started out as just a news aggregator, essentially focusing on Central Eastern Europe. It's now expanded beyond that. We've done a huge amount of coverage of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Israel-Hamas war. We've covered that in depth. And we've covered a number of other things that mainstream media has not been covering, including the persecution of Christians by Islamist fundamentalists in Nigeria. Those are some of the things that we've been focused on, but our focus over the last 6.5 months has been very much the Israel-Hamas war.
So I've been following you since October 7th. You're one of the most popular feeds on Twitter, I think top 10 even. Why so much focus on Israel?
The reason that we focus so much on the Israel-Hamas war is that it is a pivotal event in, I think, the conflict that is happening around the West. And the lack of understanding that this is not it's not a regional conflict. It's not a localized conflict. Obviously, it is to the Israelis fighting the war and being part of the ground invasion. But it's part of a much broader war that we have against this axis of evil of Iran, China, Russia, and their proxies, be it the Houthis, be it Hamas, and other acolytes. And this conflict will come to us. It is part of a wider war. And I'm incredibly concerned about the fact that the West is in a moment of great crisis, of not understanding what it is. And I think that's one of the fundamental problems the West has. We don't know where we're going. There's no vision. And the lack of vision, nature hates a vacuum. There is no such thing as a vacuum in nature. And what's going to happen is it's going to get filled in by other things. And we're seeing it with progressive ideologies, but we're also seeing it with the rise of Islam, partially through migration, partially through conversion in many European countries. And it's a greatly concerning thing. And it's greatly concerning that more people have not been interested in this war and have not stood on the right side of it.
You know, I'm not really into social media. I don't follow many people on Twitter, but I check every day Visegrád because you get things and information and news that I don't see anywhere else. Where are you getting all this information about Israel?
We have a lot of great people who work for us. We have a lot of people sending us incredible things. We've broken some fantastic stories. One of the ones I'm most proud of is there was a balloon released by pro-Palestine protesters at JFK Airport. One of the tower guards filmed it and sent it to us, asked us to break that story. So we have a lot of people sending us incredible things and really timely news. So that there is a nexus of people who trust us and who send us information. And then I have a well set up team that really does work around the clock. And all credit goes to the people who work with me rather than myself to make it happen. I think the fact that we have been biased in the sense of we've firmly opposed terrorism. Which appears to be it's not, there's no lack of journalistic integrity in opposing terrorism. It seems like the obvious thing to do, right? And yet it isn't obvious.
Well, that's interesting because you actually got an award from the Minister of Diaspora Affairs a week ago, and I watched your feed. It's not slanted for Israel. You're just telling the truth. And you are anti-terror, but isn't that shouldn't all West be anti-terror? Like, why isn't the other media covering things like you do?
If you want pro-Palestinian content, if you want pro-Hamas content, just go to any other outlet in the world. It's there, and it's there in huge amounts. So I would say that we have been, we've definitely been more interested in covering Hamas crimes than, say, some of the unfortunate mistakes that the IDF has made. And obviously, there have been some mistakes. I mean, every single army in the world will make mistakes. But unlike there is a disingenuity to covering, sort of saying, oh, the IDF has done this, and focusing on it repeatedly and hammering it down, and then ignoring all of Hamas's crimes, right? And that I feel very much is what a lot of other media outlets have done. And also, I mean, I have a great sympathy for Israel. I also have a great admiration for it. I think it's an incredible people. The tenacity, the resilience, and the understanding that life and order are fragile. It's something that the West has forgotten. The total victory of the West, the economic comfort, the physical comfort. There's no lack of food, no lack of medicine. Life is easy in the West in many, many ways. Obviously, there are difficulties. I'm not saying it's fully easy, but this is the best time in the world to be alive. And in that victory that we have had as the Western world, we've forgotten that things do not necessarily last. And Israelis and the Jewish diaspora, for many reasons, primarily through many of their own tragedies, understand that all of this can come to an end. And I really respect that about the Israelis, that they understand that tomorrow will not necessarily be better than today. And living life to the fullest, and also a preservation of the traditions, the faith that have made the Israeli people and the Jewish people into what they are today. All of that has been abandoned by the West, and it's of great concern to me.
Stefan, there are literally tens of millions of people watching the show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
My message is very simple. I believe that there is a joy to be found in your willingness to fight. I was asked a few days ago by where I find optimism. I'm not necessarily optimistic, but I think we have to wake up every morning and fight to make the world a slightly better place than it was yesterday, to the best of our ability. And there is great joy to be found in that.
Thank you, Stefan, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now, the truth from Zion.
In 2005, Israel withdrew completely from the Gaza Strip. The hope was that this disengagement would create peace with the Palestinians, but instead, it led to death and destruction.
Israel's disengagement from Gaza was a major mistake and ultimately led to the genocide we experienced on October 7th. Every time Israel relinquishes land in the false attempt for peace, terror elements move in and it leads to more war.
The Israeli government's intention was to create a separation between the Jewish and Arab populations in the area after years of terror attacks and violence. The idea of disengagement proved to be both controversial and divisive. Public opinion in the country was split. The left hoped that removing Jews from Gaza would foster stability in the region and end terrorist attacks that were destroying the lives of innocent Israelis, and that a Palestinian-only territory would be a clear signal to the international community of Israel's commitment to peace. However, the right was convinced that the vacuum created by expelled Jewish families would be filled by radical Islamists, and that terror attacks would increase, not decrease. On August 15, 2005, on the orders of then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, 9,000 Israeli citizens in 25 communities were forcibly removed from their homes in what was known as Gush Katif, and 4 additional Jewish communities were uprooted from their ancestral homeland in Samaria. The move was met with skepticism, anger, and resentment from families who were forced to start their lives over, somewhere new. By September 22nd, just 5 weeks later, the wide-scale eviction was completed. Israel no longer controlled the Gaza Strip that it had liberated in the 1967 Six-Day War. Jewish residents were forcefully removed. Jewish homes were bulldozed. Cemeteries were dug up and relocated. The military withdrew, and all signs of Jewish life in Gaza disappeared. The Fatah Party of the Palestinian Authority became the governing body of Gaza, but not for long. Just 2 years later, in 2007, Gaza residents voted to replace Fatah with the political wing of Hamas. To make sure Fatah got the message, the military wing of Hamas staged a bloody coup, killing hundreds of Fatah officials and party members. The Hamas terror organization was now the new ruler of the Gaza Strip. This Palestinian terror group was now in complete control of the coastal enclave. It soon began firing thousands of rockets and mortar shells into southern Israeli towns and villages. Their intention was to terrorize and destabilize the lives of hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens living on the Mediterranean coast and in the Negev desert. In the 3 years before the disengagement, 702 rockets were launched into Israel. By 2006, only a year after Israel removed its presence from the Gaza Strip, the number of projectiles fired into Israel almost doubled to 1,247. Some political observers said this was a clear display that the Palestinians did not want peace with Israel. Others argued that armed resistance was a great tool for the Palestinians to use, since it had already forced Israel to leave the Gaza Strip. Palestinian factions in Gaza continued to fire rockets at Israelis in hopes of pushing them out of the land of Israel entirely, or at least pressuring Israel into agreeing to their terrorist demands. These periodic attacks from Hamas were met by Israeli defensive operations, followed by ceasefires, which only allowed Hamas to regroup and restock their rocket supplies and ammunition. Israel believed this scenario was business as usual, but that it could manage these sporadic attacks. That flawed military strategy came crashing down on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched its genocidal attack, slaughtering 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, and taking 250 hostages into Gaza. As we reflect on the events of 2005, it is clear that while Israel made significant sacrifices for peace, its efforts were in vain. The disengagement from Gaza was met with hostility and violence from terrorist groups like Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The results of that failed plan ended the idea of land for peace for most Israelis. As Israel now finds itself in yet another defensive war with genocidal terrorists, it must not forget that the policy of appeasement never works, certainly not in the volatile Middle East. Up next, the ICEJ Report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
We're here in Tel Aviv in a kitchen cooking meals for soldiers in Gaza and in the north and prepping Shabbat meals. And I am here with people representing 12 nations across the world, coming to sow hope to a land that has been filled with mourning and grief, and coming really to just serve the people of this land and to show them that they're not alone.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
Right after October the 7th, as a believer, it broke my heart. I decided to come on this tour because I know it's hard for Israel to be in this war, and I know God wants to help His people, and I will be a part of that. I will give help and comfort in a practical way.
When October 7th occurred, we really didn't understand the significance because the media has been so prejudiced against Israel. We didn't know what was true and what was not true. I didn't know. I had said I had to find out for myself. As Christians, we are a part of Israel. Israel has got to be supported by Christians around every country in the world.
We stopped into the kibbutzim Be'eri, and it was just we saw the after effects of the evil attack that Hamas did on these people, and it's just on this unprovoked attack that they did, and I just could not fathom what those folks went through. I cannot fathom what the hostages are going through right now, what the families are going through. I mean, if I could say anything to those families, I'd say we love you. We're praying for you. If there's something more that we can do, please speak up. Please say something, because I know many folks who cannot be here, they want to support. Our team is made up of 23 people of 11 different plus nations, and we're all saying that we support Israel. We love Israel.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.